Hello, I'm going to be talking about, well, not so much the killing of a well-liked member of parliament, but about the sorts of comments I've been seeing on Twitter. And talking about Twitter, I want to draw your attention to a tweet made by our Night Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who put out his commiserations in the following way. I am so deeply, deeply saddened by the tragic news that Sir David has passed away. I'm sure he was quite unhappy about Sir David's death, but he wasn't strictly in accordance with the situation by saying that the poor fellow had passed away. Now, was he? He had been violently and deliberately murdered. And Sadiq Khan had never shied away from talking about the Sarah Everard murder, has he? But somehow Sir David passed away instead. It put me in mind of a comment by the American Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who, talking about the 9/11 attacks in which 19 Muslim fanatics hijacked airplanes to attack 4 separate targets in the United States, and almost 3,000 people were murdered. And her description of that was that on 9/11, some people did something. Sorry, the dog's come up. You see, I can't shout because he comes to comfort me. Some people did something. Now, I can't think why two Muslim people seem unable to admit that Muslim people are going around murdering non-Muslim people simply because they're not Muslim. It's a complete mystery to me why they should have this problem. Anyway, back to the main part of the story, which may be a little bit more serious. I was going to be talking about the Twitter discussions following the latest atrocity. Here in the UK, we have a long and richly documented history, which includes periods of religious upheavals and civil wars. We didn't just have the one, you know. People think about the King Charles Civil War, but there were others. There was Stephen and what was her name? Mabel? No, I don't remember. Goodness me, I've forgotten her name. Anyway, Matilda, that was it. And they were stamping about the countryside, causing mayhem as well. I mean, we've had quite a few problems in that respect. And we've learnt from these examples what can go wrong and what it might be best to avoid. Other societies haven't been so lucky, or indeed so willing to learn the lessons of the past. Now, an MP, Sir David Amess, was murdered last week, and this happened while he was meeting his constituents, because looking after his constituents was his job. That's part of our ordered society. I want you to bear that in mind when I then talk about the storm of Twitter discussion which has followed the murder. Many people have seized upon this particular dreadful situation as an opportunity to reference the murder of a Labour MP called Jo Cox. That was 5 years ago. And the perpetrator there was a Brexit fanatic who decided to do away with her because she, Jo Cox, was a Remainer. Many comments, therefore, took to saying things like, there was one murderous white man who was a Brexiteer, but we haven't had a lot of people saying that because one white Brexiteer was a murderer, every white Brexiteer must be a murderer. And that must mean that making much of the fact that this particular murderer is a Somali Muslim, well, that can only be because racism, can't it? So let me explain to those people in as simple a set of words as I can. there is a big difference. You see, the difference is that when Thomas Mair killed Joe Cox, we had no particular worry as a general sort of thing that this was a pattern of murders that were being committed and were going to be committed regularly in the name of Brexit. Or we weren't worried that a whole organised group of Brexiteers was going to be stabbing Remainers or mowing them down with trucks on Westminster Bridge. The sort of people who bring up Miss Cox when talking about Amos are not talking about the same thing. And deep down, most of them probably know that. It's not just that this was a murder. Those obviously do happen all the time and they're very tragic. But when someone kills because of religious hatred, that's another category altogether. And we Brits have enough of a history of that to have developed a horror of such things. A religious murder isn't just an attack on one victim, it's an attack on society. In my previous video, I spoke about how an MP is supposed to meet his constituents, or her constituents, every week so they can talk about problems that might be solved by a political representative. If that representative has to attend constituency surgeries sitting behind a plexiglass shield with an armed guard at his side, then that puts several levels of distance between him or her and his voting public, or her voting public. You have to be so careful about these things nowadays, don't you? So anyway, that's an attack on the relationship we are supposed to have with our MPs. I'm not saying that all MPs are saints and that all of them are, meeters and greeters or even good MPs, but all I can talk about is what is supposed to happen. So all those who show such an abhorrence for this sort of act are reacting not just to the murder, but to the possibility that if a society has people killing for the sake of religion, our whole social system becomes the victim, not just the one person who gets knifed or shot or whatever. When people feel they can take their religious fervour into the streets, then they might start with out-and-out heretics, but then the orthodoxies narrow and it turns into a general licence. We see that in Pakistan, where atheists are killed in the street and women who don't want an arranged marriage with a first cousin are being killed by their own families. It didn't used to be like that when Pakistan started out, but over the years it's narrowed down and it's got worse and worse. And Pakistan has become less and less governable. But this was sort of inevitable because one of the ongoing problems with Islam is that the individual is responsible for punishing the heretic or the infidel. The individual is. If you see somebody contravening the laws of Islam and you are a religious Muslim, you are supposed to be duty bound to do something about it. Over here, we turned that doubtful privilege over to the state, but in places like Somalia, for instance, this tribal method of social control is well established and accepted. Does it work? Well, take a look at Somalia. Schools, innovations, industry, science, nothing. It's chaos out there. And that's why people are talking about the man. His name is Ali Harbi Ali, by the way, and he's a Muslim and he's a Somali. It's not racism. It's a very justified concern that this is not a direction into which we want our society to proceed. And people who haul out the racism card are either being disingenuous or they have absolutely no knowledge of history at all. Oh, I always remember this at the last minute. Look, the last 3 or 4 videos I've made, they have not been monetized simply because I'm talking about what YouTube is pleased to define as protected groups or vulnerable groups or something. So the only way you can help me is by liking, sharing, and subscribing, and hit that bell. All right, well, thanks very much. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.